This is From Both Sides, a spontaneous, free-flowing conversation featuring a dynamic team of women, providing insights into both political and civic events affecting the lives of women throughout Pennsylvania. And now, here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of From Both Sides. I'm Michelle Saletto, your host. Advancements in robotics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning are growing at an exponential rate. Some reports suggest that robots threaten to take up to 50% of our jobs by 2025. The world is changing faster than most of us have ever imagined. Are you ready to embrace this state of disruption? Stay with us and you'll find out today. Joining me to lead the discussion is my guest co-host, Maura Donnelly. Maura is a technology expert herself and maintains a communication company and is also the co-host of Behind the Headlines. Welcome, Maura. I can't think of anybody better to co-host the show than you.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to our discussion.
Okay.
That'd be great.
And before we get into it, I just do want to admit that I am a low-tech person before you mention that, but we'll keep it on the down low today.
I'm a geek.
Okay.
So.
I know you are. I know you are.
We have a good balance here.
Okay, we do. We do. I'd like to introduce our guest today, John McElligott. John is a vision caster and a technical futurist. And if we don't know what those are, we need to ask.
We should ask, yes.
He's the founder of the Fortress Initiative, the Fortress Academy, and York Exponential, as well as several tech startup companies. He's a highly sought-after national speaker, and among other things we'll find out today, if John ever sleeps. John, how do you do all of these things? I mean, it's not like you've been in the business for 50 years. You're a young man. How did you get started in all of this?
It's an interesting story, and thank you both for having me here today. I'm not originally from York, Pennsylvania, so I live in Pennsylvania right now, but I'm originally from Springfield, Massachusetts. When I was 8 years old, my family decided to become missionaries, so I lived all over the world until I was 18. I came back to the United States to go to college. When I was in college, I joined the Marine Corps. I always wanted to be in the Navy SEALs, and my goal was to be something called a Mustang. So a Mustang is when you go in as enlisted, you kind of earn your stripes, and then you transfer over to becoming an officer. The idea was that your guys would respect you more, and because the Marine Corps was a division of the Navy, it made more sense for me to go through the Marine Corps to be prepared to be a Navy SEAL. Now, I got married very young, and I'm not married anymore, but as much as I like blowing things up and jumping out of planes, my wife at the time did not want me doing any of that stuff.
Most wives aren't too keen on those things.
Right, right. So I made a decision that I was going to do something completely different. But unfortunately, when my contract was just about up, 9/11 happened. So I was a part of what was called the stop loss. Now, my MOS was in very high demand. I was a combat engineer. So we essentially were the same as infantrymen. We carried machine guns. We carried squad automatic weapons, but we also carried explosives. So we did a lot of breaching through either buildings, doors, tanks, bridges. And so my MOS was in such high demand that they wouldn't let any of us out. So I ended up being in the next several months, and when the stop loss was lifted, I was able to get out. And because all I'd ever wanted to do was be in the military, I needed to decide what I was going to do, because sitting behind a desk was not going to be for me. So I decided to get into music. So interestingly enough, at that time, I ended up touring with my band, spent a lot of time in New York. Simultaneously, I was growing a photography business. I realized that a lot of professional photographers had refused to adopt.
A long and winding road.
Yeah, it all kind of ties together.
Yeah.
They had refused to adopt digital technology. So I saw an opportunity because the technology wasn't quite there, but I could see that it was growing, so I put all my money into digital photography. Very quickly, myself and my ex-wife became one of the most sought-after photographers in the world, particularly in the wedding industry. So that grew very quickly until I saw another shift happen several years later when a lot of new people were starting to get into the industry very, very quickly because most of the camera manufacturers realized there was a growing prosumer market. So after that, I can't keep doing this anymore, so I created a technology startup that, instead of fighting this next generation, found a way to help.
So it sounds like that you've always been looking ahead. You're the type of person that looks ahead, looks at the trends, sees what's coming down the road, and then kind of jumps on it.
Yeah, that's really kind of been my pattern, which is how I've fallen into this role. Very quickly, from my tech startup, I started a real estate development company because I realized if I was ever really going to raise significant funds here, you had to do something you can touch, see, and feel. Software was kind of like magic. So I was one of the co-founders of Royal Square Development and Construction in downtown York. My time with the company, in about 2 years, we grew from 3 employees to over 40. We acquired about 50 properties in downtown York. Went from doing $100,000 projects to $1.5 million to $14 million, all in about 18 months. So we moved very, very quickly. I left actually almost 2 years ago to today to found the Fortress Academy. So we went after the Western National Bank, and we are turning that into our region's first robotics and computer programming accelerator in school.
So I think you just defined vision caster and technical futurist.
Yeah, it's seeing the signs. The signs are there, and history tends to repeat itself. It speeds up, but there's a pattern. And if you can learn to identify that pattern, you can start to see where things are coming. Unfortunately, for most folks now, it's happening so fast that it's almost like drinking from a fire hose.
Is that why you say the world isn't changing, it's being disruptive?
Yeah, correct. So change is constant, and it's all the time. You can't stop change, but a lot of times change is good. You grow, you learn new things, but there's a difference between that and disruption. Growth can come from within, but typically disruption comes from outside. You don't always see it, and sometimes you don't see how things connect. So for example, Elon Musk is a great example of this. He created Tesla. Most of the car companies thought it was cute because they tried to do electric car companies at some point and thought there's no way it's going to work. When in reality, he was creating a robot on 4 wheels. Like, they didn't really understand what he was trying to do. So he was disrupting himself through this whole pattern. And as much as everybody likes to think Elon Musk is doing the things he's doing for green and sustainability for our nation or our world, the reality is all he wants to do is get to Mars. So if you can wrap your head around his goal is to get to Mars, all of the other stuff he needs to solve, and he can't solve on his own, which is why he's willing to take such big risks to disrupt other industries that don't seem to make sense to a lot of people. So he's a perfect example of disruption. So if you have a business that has to be duplicated on another planet, you're probably in his path in some way. And that's very difficult for people to understand.
Right.
Because when they see Tesla, they go, oh, it's a car company.
Yeah.
They don't think it's a Mars company, but it really is. And you can see how SpaceX, Solar City, all of these things are tying together to essentially set them up on another planet.
John, why do you think these technological advancements are occurring so fast, exponentially? Why is this happening at this rate?
So it's not that they've sped up, and I think that's one of the hard things for people to wrap their head around.
Misconception.
Yeah, exponential growth is very different than accelerating growth. Now, we are hitting a point of there's something called the law of accelerating returns, which basically means you hit a tipping point where it just continues to speed up. But exponential growth is hard for human beings to wrap their heads around because we think linear. For the longest time, it served us perfectly. If you see a deer running in a field, you have a bow and arrow, you can pull it back, anticipate where the deer is going, and you can take it down. You never expect the deer to speed up and fly off into space. But exponential growth grows just like that. There's a story that Ray Kurzweil, who's the head of deep learning for Google, likes to tell. And it's the invention of chess, and it illustrates this point perfectly. Thousands of years ago, there was an emperor, and he loved games. But he'd mastered every game that there was. So he sent a decree out in the whole kingdom and said, whoever can bring a game that I can't win right away will have anything their heart desires. So people came from all over the kingdom, but the emperor beat every single one of them. Until one day, an inventor showed up, and he'd fashioned a chessboard out of wood. He sat down, he described the game to the emperor, and they played. And game after game after game, the inventor beat the emperor. But instead of being angry, the emperor was delighted. This was everything that he wanted. It had strategy, warfare. He told the inventor, you'll have anything that your heart desires. So the inventor said, I want one thing, and it's a very simple request. All I would like is 1 grain of rice placed on the first square of the chessboard, and on the second 2, and then 4, and then 16, growing exponentially. And the emperor looked at the rice and looked at the chessboard and looked at the inventor. They said, granted, this seems like a very humble request. But very quickly, the emperor realized that he'd been duped, because by the time it was a quarter way through the chessboard, it was more rice than in the whole kingdom. And by the time it had just stepped onto the second line, it was more rice than in the whole world. Right? And that's how exponential growth grows. It's not that it's growing by steps, it's that it's growing exponentially by itself. And the reality is, if you look at the smartphone technology, you look at the internet, these did seem to come out of nowhere, but that was a perfect example of exponential growth. And we're about to enter the second half of that chessboard. And that's why this is so critical to discuss this right now.
So let's bring it down to a level that the average person can understand. You've done a lot of talking about the Internet of Things. And you know, we're now celebrating 10 years of the Apple devices, or the first Apple device that you would call a platform, and I think Steve Jobs called the first pocket computer, basically. But it has grown tremendously since 10 years ago, which is just phenomenal, and then there are other companies building the same smartphones and everything. So tell us a little bit about the Internet of Things and how it really impacts me, because I like to make it all about me. How about me on a daily basis? What does that mean to the average person?
So that's a great question. And also the fact that you pointed back to the iPhone is a perfect example of why this is happening right now. We have demanded so much from our devices, and so many devices, that the price of sensors has dropped to next to nothing, right? I mean, we want them to be smaller, faster, better, smaller, faster, better. And so that drive has got us mass producing sensors to the point of where you can put a sensor on anything. You could put a sensor on your mug so that when you go to drink and you put it down, your mug knows that you don't have coffee. It'll let your coffee maker know to brew some more coffee because your mug is empty.
Wow.
Now, this isn't crazy far out stuff. I mean, this stuff is happening right now. One of the best examples is Nest, if you're familiar with Nest, and some of your viewers could Google Nest.
My friend Patty Kim just gave me one for my place at the shore.
Yeah, the thermostats.
Yeah.
So that's a great example of basically the dropping price of sensors connected to the internet, connecting all of your devices together.
Yeah.
So that is essentially the Internet of Things. It's dumb devices being made intelligent by attaching sensors and having a centralized computing platform. And a lot of this right now is going to be built around our iPhones, our smartphones, or even our smartwatches.
See, I think people think all of this is on the horizon.
No, it's happening.
I know.
It's
and
here.
I just,
It's
yeah,
here.
that's what I don't think people really
But
understand.
there's some challenges to that, you know, as you know, and so I'd like to talk a little bit about it, and I'll tell you a little story that'll lead into it, and that was that I was getting a oil change over the holidays, and we were talking about Christmas presents, and he was saying that his wife wanted to get him one of those.
He is your oil.
The oil change guy.
Yeah.
You know, he wanted to get one of those. You know, home devices. I won't name the companies, but you know, you turn on my lights.
Smart assistant.
Yeah, smart assistant.
Okay.
And he said to her, well, I'm really not interested in having that, because you might as well just invite the Russians over for dinner. Because, you know, the denial of services attacks that have occurred over the last several years, and a lot more recently, are coming through webcams and these devices that we've got hooked to everything. How do we stop that from happening? Can we stop it from happening? And what should the average person do if they really want to be an early adopter and really want to have these new devices in their homes? How can they remain safe from cyber attacks?
So that's an incredibly insightful question, and it's neat that your oil change guy is connecting all the dots.
Yeah.
So the truth is this, and I think as Michelle was saying, this has already happened, right? Like, all of our devices are connected and consistently sharing data to the point of they would be useless if they aren't doing this. So there's a number of things I think that need to be done, and this administration probably will be a determining factor in this, of how we handle this.
President.
Okay. I would say this, yes,
Okay.
these next 4 years. That's another term of exponential growth and effect, is understanding that the value of time is speeding up as well. So 4 years now is worth 40 years of innovation a year ago. And so that's why this is so critical. One of the reasons we started the Fortress Academy is because there is a huge gap in people with skill sets that understand this. It's not as difficult as it used to be. So I think what's going to happen is every business is going to need somebody that understands cybersecurity, even small businesses. So these skill sets aren't going to just be reserved for the government anymore. I think they're going to have to work their way into all sorts of different industries. So that's the first thing. There's a huge skills gap, and we need to fix that. We need to fix that very, very quickly. The second, and you're starting to see this now, companies like Google and Alphabet are starting to develop artificial intelligence that's designed to protect for cybersecurity. So you're seeing algorithms written that can move faster than a hacker. And for the first time, it's really interesting. In fact, Google did this, I think it was maybe 2 months ago. They created 3 AIs, and they were kind of goofy at the very beginning, so they were machine learning platforms. They were basically designed to learn how to encrypt. And very quickly, the one AI started figuring things out, and the other 2 were kind of useless, but that first one informed the other 2. And they have like a name like Joe, Diana, and something else. They have like 3 names.
Yeah.
But very quickly, they developed their own language. And they started talking to each other, and the researchers couldn't figure out what they were saying.
But were they doing what they wanted them to do, which was encrypt?
The idea was that they would come up with an encryption that couldn't be broken. And right now, the only entities that could understand it were the AIs that created it. So this is but probably
that's frightening and heartening at the same time.
Right. So actually, and you had talked earlier about the job loss. We can get a little bit more into that later. I think the opportunity that the United States has right now is Our strength is going to be viewing technology very differently. Right now, at best, we view it as a computer in our pocket or a tool. Very quickly, it's getting better than us at a lot of different things, and there are things that we're much better at it than them. We should probably start viewing technology more as a peer and working alongside it. So my philosophy isn't replacing people with technology, it's augmenting people with technology.
Well, John, on that note, we're going to take a break and we're going to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
From Both Sides is a production of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy and is made possible by the support of the Pennsylvania Center for Women and Politics at Chatham University, a nonpartisan center devoted to fostering women's public leadership through education, empowerment, and action. The first to focus on women's political involvement in Pennsylvania, the center integrates disciplinary knowledge, civic education, and capacity building, while examining the intersection of women and public policy. From Both Sides is also sponsored by the Winter Group, a full-service government relations firm based in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We guide clients through the challenging seasons of public affairs with experience and capability second to none. Visit us at www.wintergrouppa.com. From Both Sides is also supported as a public service by Saul Ewing LLP, a law firm with a 100-year tradition of serving the needs of business, government, education, healthcare, technology, and manufacturing in our region. And by the University Center for International Studies, the engine for extending the global reach of the University of Pittsburgh and its students. From Both Sides is also sponsored by Dr. Wendell Funk, one of Central Pennsylvania's most experienced cosmetic plastic surgeons. Dr. Funk is a leader in new and innovative non-invasive procedures like cool sculpting. His long-term experience with all types of cosmetic surgery, as well as facial injectables, keeps new and repeat patients returning to his practice in Lancaster, York, and Camp Hill. From Both Sides is also sponsored by the Ed and Jeannie Arnold Foundation.
Hi, welcome back to From Both Sides. We're here today with John McElligott, a futurist who's talking about the advancement in artificial intelligence and how it's going to impact our society. John, following up what we were talking about earlier, tell us how some of the artificial intelligence and all of the machine learning can now change our lives on an individual way, medically. How's it going to change, what we do, how we function, and what kind of jobs are going to be out there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So this is the flip side to this, because there is a lot of doom and gloom. And the reality is, if we continue going the way we're going, we're guaranteed to be left behind. But if we do embrace this change and start to understand it, we literally are on the verge of being able to cure any disease, like solve poverty. I mean, there's an incredible opportunity for us to do amazing, amazing things right here in Pennsylvania. One of the best examples is IBM's Watson. Do you remember when Watson was on Jeopardy and beat the Jeopardy champions? Well, most people didn't realize that Watson was created to be a doctor. So right now, Watson is diagnosing patients and curing cancer. In fact, Watson just matched doctors in identifying skin cancer. So the ability for you to be able to identify and diagnose skin cancer from your smartphone is just about here. Think of how many people's lives that maybe don't have access to health care or have no idea that they even have an issue, that their smartphone will be able to say, you have a problem, you have skin cancer, and then your phone will schedule your meeting with your doctor. So that leads to the jobs question. The truth is, it's very difficult to know what kind of jobs are going to be here. And this is a big part of what we do, because we do work with the Workforce Investment Board, and going through our licensing with the Department of Education, you have to show a past history of employment. It's very difficult to prepare people for jobs that aren't here yet if you are not aware of what's actually happening. The other hard thing for people to understand is they like to hear like a 10 or 20-year plan. They don't want to hear, well, this is what you'll be doing in a year, but you might not be doing it a year from then.
Right. Yeah,
that's very
that is
difficult.
Very different.
Yeah.
Very different. Yes.
Well, John, I don't think we've mentioned this yet, but you're on Pennsylvania's STEM Advisory Board, correct?
I am, yes, for K through 12. Yeah.
And you're also creating an academy, Fortress Academy. And so I'd really like our viewers to hear a little bit about those. It seems that you have quite a dedication to education and this future that you talk about. You're not just talking about it. You're putting your money where your mouth is.
Right.
So let's hear a little bit about the Fortress Academy.
Awesome. Well, yeah, the Fortress Academy, we didn't realize this, so we're an accelerated education facility around computer programming, robotics, 12-week courses at maximum. The goal is to take someone with no knowledge and give them a baseline understanding and skill set of a junior level programmer so they can immediately have the on-ramp into a technology career. We cut out a lot of the fluff. Our focus is on giving them the skills, but primarily the mindset to be able to adapt continually moving forward.
Continually learning.
Correct.
Hard to say, but yeah.
Yeah, forever. I mean,
Right.
we're really hitting that point where a piece of paper does not guarantee you a job anymore. And people are looking for alternative education. So for us, we're a fraction of the cost of a traditional education. We know that we're getting you ready for a job right now because employers are telling us exactly what they need.
And in a shorter time
In a
frame.
much shorter period of time. So with the Academy, that was our purpose, was a rapid upskilling of a whole generation. Now, one of the things we realized was that education is in a state of change right now. I mean, there's a lot of very high-level debates, but very few people are talking about some of the things we're talking about. And that's what excited me about being on the K through 12 STEM Advisory Committee, is there were folks from Carnegie Mellon, there were folks from Pittsburgh. I mean, the people that are doing amazing things like
Best and brightest.
Pennsylvania. Yeah, we are at the forefront of this technology. So the fact that educators in Pennsylvania are coming together and having this discussion, I think sets Pennsylvania apart from all of the other states. It's one of the things that makes me so excited about starting a school here, running a company here, creating a movement here, is that we have all of the pieces. So that for me has been very exciting, that this discussion is happening at a very high level. I think the next phase is making sure all of the educators are included in this so they maybe don't get whiplash or all of a sudden they see this out of nowhere.
Well, I do have to say, as a former school superintendent, I do believe that this is going to change the way we lay out our schools in Pennsylvania and all over the world, apparently. But I just, and it's also universities.
Yes.
I'm not sure personally, and I apologize to the architects I know, if I would be building any more buildings if I were in public schools or in universities, because, you know, at one time those places were the hub of knowledge, and now knowledge is everywhere through the internet and the capabilities that we have. So I just think it's going to be a very changing environment.
Yeah, no, that's an incredible observation, and I agree that that's starting to happen. And the millennial generation was really the first, right? Because they were told if you do these steps, you're guaranteed X. And so now there's lots and lots of people, you know, within my generation and younger, that are burdened with a lot of debt and coming out and realizing that they can't get a job for what they went to school for. Their younger siblings are seeing this. And so they're starting to think, well, what do I do? Do I want to be burdened with debt, and then maybe I have to work in a coffee shop or somewhere because I can't get a job in my field? These are discussions that are starting to happen now. I think there will be still a place for higher education and facilities, but the facilities will have to be built very differently. So, for example, virtual and augmented reality is going to be very, very valuable. So for universities to become relevant, I think we're going to see a shakeup. I think you're going to start to see a lot of schools like ours, the accelerated, very rapid, agile, coming in to fill that workforce development piece. And there will be people that will go on to do other things, because we're not designed for that. We're not designed to create PhDs. We have a very specific focus. And then you're going to see the research institutions start to double down, and you're starting to see that at MIT, Carnegie Mellon, they're actually starting to spin out startups and companies. It's that middle group, I think, that is going to have to really figure out what their value proposition is. Because for a while, their value proposition is, we're not as expensive as. And you're right, when education can be free and you can access information and you don't have to be on site, your value proposition can't be, we're not as expensive as X, because now you have to say, we're not as expensive as free. And that's a very hard sell. The other argument from a technology standpoint is, if you're going to school for technology and you don't want to be a researcher, being in an academic environment for 4 years, unless the culture of the university has this, you're essentially taken out of circulation for 4 years. And if you remember when I talked about how 4 years now is worth 40 years in 5 year ago time, that's the same thing, that if the university isn't actively involved in research, actively involved in the community, actively helping people grow, taking someone out of circulation for 4 years could be the kiss of death if the university doesn't understand that.
And how are companies changing with all of the advent of this kind of technology?
So this is, again, an incredible question. As we went through creating our school, I'm not traditionally an educator. I'm an entrepreneur. And we saw a specific need, and I partnered with educators, and I brought in instructors that have taught at universities, so they've seen the good and the bad. One of our largest problems, and this is probably going to be the hardest thing for our nation, and especially Pennsylvania, From a workforce development side, if you're not a research institution, most universities or community colleges or tech schools are responding to employers. And employers are saying, I want more X. So manufacturing is a good example. There's a shift happening because China made some mistakes and manufacturing is coming back to the US. It's not coming back because the manufacturers in the US made the right decision. It's coming back because China did something wrong. So what happens is the workforce people get all the employers in a room and they say, tell us what you need. And most employers have no clue any of this stuff is happening, so they say, I need more of what I know. We need to restructure not only education, K through 12 and university, we need a robust education platform for employers. Like from a Department of Education standpoint, employers need to be educated. Government officials need to be educated. People that are decision makers that are dictating what our next 1 year, 2 year, 4 year, 8 year budget need to be aware that this is happening. And that's a huge paradigm shift when the person at the top of the company used to be the one that knew everything. And now
and saw the future.
And saw the future. And now there's a serious disconnect between what's happening and where we need to go. So unless we're intentional about educating our government officials, educating our leadership within communities, nonprofits, you name it, the people that are dictating the future of our communities need to be that first line of defense, not first line of offense.
John, we only have a little bit of time left, so two really quick questions. One, did any of this, was the 2016 presidential election influenced by any of this? And two, really quickly, we want to hear about your book, your upcoming book. So really quickly on the presidential, anything you have?
Yeah, so probably the lowest hanging fruit is, Russians hacking emails and stuff like that. That's what everybody's aware of. But the more interesting piece, and the piece we should understand, is artificial intelligence ran this election. Most people have no clue that this happened. What's happening is the same algorithm that figures out what kind of sneakers you want to buy or t-shirts, when you go to a different website and the little ads pop up, is the same algorithm that's learning your political tastes and what you believe. People are more transparent with their browser than they are with their spouse. So that algorithm knows who you are better than your family
You can
does.
go in and figure out what Facebook thinks you are.
Right?
It tells you
know,
in your settings.
And what happens is whatever you believe, this algorithm feeds you more. So it's reinforcing what you already believe. Now, a perfect example is my mom. I love my mom, but she just discovered YouTube not very long ago. So she'll watch a video, and that video will then suggest another video that suggests another one, and she can sit there for 6 hours watching the same thing, and she'll say, I've researched it. Not understanding that an algorithm is feeding you this. The algorithm doesn't know if the information is true or not, right?
Yeah, it just knows what your preferences are.
Exactly, so it just reinforces what you already believe. So it's important that we understand that you're not discovering this information. It's being fed to you by an algorithm.
And that's a really critical point. John, we're going to be closing now, but I want to tell everyone that they can look forward to your upcoming book called Embracing Disruption. And we'll hope we'll have you back when your book is ready. I'd like to thank you for being here today, and I'd like to thank all of our viewers and remind the women of Pennsylvania that there is much more that unites us than divides us. Thank you, and we hope you join us again.